Okay, we're here today with Sheriff Tim Swanson, been Stark County Sheriff since back in the 1990s?
1999, July.
Yeah, right. And recently decided not to seek re-election, which left the office up for contest, and there was a contest between one of your most reliable and trusted top chief deputies, Mike McDonald, who ran against Larry Dordia, the Republican, and Mr. McDonald won the election, but unfortunately, because of health reasons, was not able to take office, and even more tragically passed away then in February of this year, and which brought on the need to replace Sheriff-elect McDonald, which was up to the Stark County Democratic Central Committee, and that event occurred on February 5th of 2013, and that's where our account begins, because one of the primary persons involved in that particular process was Sheriff Swanson. Sheriff Swanson had a definite idea of who the replacement for Mr. McDonald ought to be, and advanced that idea. And so pick it up from there, Sheriff Swanson, if you would, as to who you chose as the person you thought was most qualified to succeed Mr. McDonald, and why.
Well, there was a discussion held between Chief McDonald and myself prior to his death, and it was a rather sad moment. We were at hospice, and he said, "Tim, I'm just not going to be able to fill this. I'm just not going to be able to fill that spot. Someone's going to have to take my place. Do you have any idea who we should, look at?"
Could you give us a time frame? When would that conversation have taken place?
Probably in January, and early January. And we talked, and we threw out some names with one another of people here in the office that we thought had some interest or expressed an interest someday being sheriff. So having those names in mind, I told him I'd come back and I would talk to those individuals privately and see who may be interested. I did. And Lou was the only one who said that, yes, he would be interested.
And that was Lieutenant Lou Darrow.
Yeah.
Been with the department for a number of years?
26 years, I think.
I see.
So I knew Lou had an interest in it, and so we talked, and I said, you know what, I'd help you, but I have not heard of anybody else interested in it. So if you're really, confident that that's what you want to do, and you talk to your wife, then we'll proceed and we'll submit your name as a candidate. And so he got back to me in a day or so and told me, yeah, he did. So that's how we came up with Lou's name. There was other people that we'd asked and considered, and they just weren't ready in time to do so. Maybe in the future they all look at it, but not at that moment. So that's how Lou was garnered and chosen, and we were confident in Lou's ability. He's been a sergeant and had been recently promoted to lieutenant.
Were you confident at that time that he stood a good chance to be selected by the Stark County Democratic Party Central Committee?
I was real confident because I didn't think there was anybody else involved. I hadn't heard no one had come forward to say anything, and then that's when I got a call from Randy Gonzalez, the party chairman, to tell me that he'd like to meet with myself and Mr. Burnaby concerning the sheriff's issue. I had no idea what that was about. When I got down to Tom Burnaby's office,
at the Stark County office building, the commissioner's office.
Yes, the commissioner's office, I was told that George Maier was interested in the position, and Randy.
And again, I'm sorry for the interruption, but just time frame wise, when would that meeting occurred to your best recollection?
That has to be sometime in early January also.
So it was within a matter of days that you talked with Mr. McDonald?
Yes. They got George on speakerphone, and the four of us had a conversation concerning the issue. I was very friendly with George. I mean, I've known him all his life. When he started out with Lawrence Township, when he went to Hartville, when he went to the State Patrol, I've supported him through his career. I wrote letters for him to become the Colonel of the Highway Patrol. We served as co-chairman on the Ohio Interoperability Committee in Columbus. Known his family, brothers. I didn't have a problem with George. So I told him in a meeting that I thought he was, possibly lacking some ability to meet the requirements based on he's been out of law enforcement so long. I even gave him a special deputies commission when he left the state here, and swore him in early January when I did swear everybody else in because Mike couldn't do it.
Okay. But that wasn't a factor in whether or not he was qualified to be Stark County Sheriff.
No, that's not a factor. He has to be full-time employment.
I see.
And his brother had been a special deputy for me in the Massillon school system since he retired from the Massillon Police Department. So, what I'm trying to lay out, I guess, is that we have a history, and a very good history.
A friendly history.
Yes. So, as a conversation went on, I told George, I said, look, I think you'd make a great sheriff. I think you'd do a fantastic job. There's no doubt in my mind, and I will support you. If you qualify, I will tell Lou Darrell, wait your turn. We're going to move on with George, and we'll go that route. I promise you that.
Now, at that meeting, was Chairman Gonzalez indicating his support for George Maier?
Yes.
And was Commissioner Burnaby?
Tom never really said anything about who he supported. He just wanted the best candidate and was willing to listen to both of us in regards to who I was proposing and who Randy had brought up. Tom wasn't really paying partisan at that point on anyone. Right,
but he's of course changed since then, and has definitely, and he's indicated to me that he really feels that George Maier should be the sheriff.
Okay, well, he hasn't shared that with me. I did have a conversation with him, but he said the courts will have to settle all this. I met with him yesterday, and everyone's entitled to their own opinion.
Right, and my comment wasn't on the legal requirements, just as a matter of Maier's long-standing police work, and I have the same read on the commissioner that you do in terms of the legal issue.
Okay. So, and then sometime I spoke with Randy today by public service, and he reminded me he can't remember everything about that meeting, nor can I, and maybe I'm off a little bit, but it was brought up about hiring him. In fact, I think Randy wanted me to bring him on as chief deputy or something, and I said I couldn't do that.
For a couple days, right?
We didn't even specify at the time.
Oh, they didn't. Okay.
All right, and then...
But that was Randy's idea?
Yeah, he said if I brought him on as chief deputy, it'd help him get acclimated out here, get to know Brian Arnold, who runs the jail, and know everything. It would be a benefit to him. So,
and did he also say, as I understood, I've listened to your conversation with Ron Ponder that you did yesterday, that I understood you to say that Randy expressed a concern that George was not qualified and he needed to come on out here to get himself into, in their opinion, qualification status.
Possibly there was a problem with him being out of law enforcement so long that this would help booster the fact that he'd been away from law enforcement if I hired him. And I didn't give him an answer. I was kind of mute on that, and I said I'd have to look into that, and I didn't give him any answer.
So if Commissioner Burnaby told me earlier today, I talked to him, that he felt that you were on board with an acceptance of that notion and idea, but your statement is you didn't make any commitment either way.
No, and Randy will tell you the same thing.
Okay.
I made no commitment. And then later I told him that no, I wouldn't do that. Not that meeting, later in that meeting, sometime later after this meeting, I said I'm not going to circumvent the law, and I don't think hiring him a couple days or whatever the case might be would qualify him to meet the requirements, nor would I try to circumvent the law. Either you meet him or you don't. And George was very pleasant about that, and he understood that. He said based on his educational background and his background in law enforcement, he hoped that he met it, and he said, I will not submit my name if I don't qualify. And I said, okay, I take your word for it. Well, he put his packet together. I've never seen his packet, never looked at his packet. I heard it was there, and that the judge had sent it down for a background check. So when things started coming back, I heard that the prosecutor's office was reviewing it to make sure that he could stand the test of the Ohio Revised Code in regards to meeting all the requirements. And I was hearing things I was keeping in contact with Debbie Dawson, and she explained to me that they didn't think that he qualified. Well, then it came out 4 prosecutors, to include John Ferraro, were saying no, he didn't meet the qualification. I asked Vivian to look at it independently. She came back and said she didn't feel so either. And then I had 2 independent attorneys sometime a little bit later, Greg Beck and Jim Matthews, who also agreed with the same findings. So I said, I got to go with what my prosecutor's saying, my legal advisor here at the sheriff's office is saying, and I've got to go with what they say. So I called Randy. I told him, I said, I don't think George is going to meet the qualifications. He says, well, I think he will. I said, come on, if he's not going to meet him, I said, how about getting behind Lou and help me get Lou? And I said, point him to the position, and we'll work very hard to get him elected next year. He said, no, I think George is going to meet him. I said, all right. So I left to go at that. And then I came back up from Florida. I was down there for the winter, and I came back up so I would be here for the February 5th meeting. Now, in the meantime, I did some checking and did some digging around, and I thought maybe the judge is the one who would read all that and decide whether or not. Well, I learned that Judge Forsoni, that's not his job.
Right.
All he is to do is order the packet put together and ship it off to the FBI and BCI for a background check. When he gets that back, if those are all clean, he then sends it to the Board of Elections.
And that was Stark County Court of Common Pleas Judge Frank Forsoni,
right.
Correct?
Exactly. So then I went to the Board of Elections, and I asked the Board of Elections, Jeanette Mullane, do they review the packets? And she said, no, we don't review them. I said, well, who does review them? Said, the party. I said, you mean the Democratic Party? She said, they're supposed to make sure, the Central Committee is supposed to make sure they meet all the criteria. So I thought that February 5th meeting we would review and vet both candidates. I had never expected Mr. Doherty to show up there, but when he did, but I thought for sure we'd vet both candidates. And Randy said, no, we're not going to. I've had Mike Thompson look at him, and I've spoke with Mark Oakey on the telephone. And
oh, it was Mark and not Steve? Because he had said Steve at the meeting.
All right, maybe he said Steve.
Okay.
You were at the meeting.
I was at the meeting, right. And, I'm don't want to correct you, except that's what I recall hearing.
Mr. Oakey. He spoke with Mr. Oakey about public service and ran some things by him, and he felt that, if you remember the meeting, you remember him saying this to everybody in the crowd, that it appeared on the surface that everything was fine. And he was going to proceed with the vote. Well, there's a bunch of things happened in that meeting, as you witnessed when you were there. And then they had us sign ballots, which I didn't mind signing. They knew who I was supporting.
But do you think that was a chilling effect in terms of someone who would want to vote for Mr. Darrow? And because the chairman came out very clearly in favor of Mr. Maier, and in fact wrote a document to that effect.
Yes, and I understand that the parliamentarian, or that person that was there from the Democratic Party out of Columbus, had problems with that, and had problems with Randy supporting a candidate where Randy,
and he's chairing the meeting.
Yeah, he should have remained neutral in the whole thing.
Did you express to Chairman Gonzalez that you had a problem with him chairing the meeting?
No, not chairing the meeting. No.
Okay.
So the votes we had to sign our ballots, and I heard rumblings from the people in there. I've never done that before. That was my first time. I got on the Central Committee to help Randy. I thought I'd just be there and be a good Democrat and be on the Central Committee. First time I was ever on it. So
just to return to my question, do you think that had a chilling effect on your candidate?
Yes, I do. I think the rumbling I heard was, why are they asking us to sign our things? I think people would vote differently if they knew they could vote anonymously in secret rather than with their names on it. But I don't buy that, really. I mean, if I have a desire, you will know about it. I don't hide
Right. Well, but Tim Swanson is a pretty direct and a man of his own mind person, correct?
Yeah, and some people aren't. So maybe some people are influenced by that, you know, and I felt that could have had a chilling effect on the whole outcome of everything. But we only lost by 8 votes.
Right. Was that a surprise to you?
Yes, I was surprised that we were that close.
Right.
And I didn't know there was such a turmoil in the Democratic Party as I saw that night, which I think you witnessed as well as me. So then this parliamentarian gentleman gets up from the Democratic Party in Columbus, and he says, now, if anyone has a problem with this vote, the only one who has any standing to file with the Ohio Supreme Court is the sheriff, the prosecutor, or the attorney general. So I didn't know what that meant. I've never done any of this before. So I made a beeline to John Ferrara, who was there, and I said, John, are you going to file anything? And he said, Tim, I can't. I did an affidavit in support of Lou, and an affidavit stating that Mr. Maier was not eligible candidate. I said, okay. I didn't say another word. I said, thank you, and I made a beeline to George Maier. And that's a picture you see in a paper, him talking and me talking with one another. I said, George, I think you'd make a great sheriff. I think you'd do a great job. I've got no bones with you at all. But I don't think you qualify, and I'm not going to ignore the qualifications that we worked so hard to get. I'm going to file. I said, do what you have to do. And I went over to Mr. Beck, and I said, would you represent me, because I don't know what any of this is. He said, absolutely, I will. And that's how it all started rolling. And we just sat back and waited and see what I was willing to live with the outcome of. My feelings when I expressed, I never have a bad word to say about George Maier as far as his capability and his ability to do the job. And what little time he was in office here, I think he's done a good job here. I'm not looking for fault. I'm not trying to point fingers.
But you're pointing the finger at Chairman Gonzalez, as I understood, in listening to your comments in the Ponder interview, that you're not nearly as charitable with the chairman.
Well, I'm disappointed that Randy wouldn't be more open-minded. It's like he's locked into this situation, and now the ruling has come down. I felt that this wasn't a victory for Tim Swanson. Wasn't a thing. I wasn't trying to. I was just trying to make sure a certified, qualified person sat in this seat. I worked 13 years in the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association while I was sheriff to bring our standards up. Understand something, Martin. When I started here in 1972, if you could raise your right hand and say, I swear, you got a job. There was no schooling. There was nothing. We have brought the position of law enforcement out of the gutters and into a professional being, to where you got to be a professional, be schooled, and have proper training in order to be in the law enforcement career.
So you asked Attorney Beck to file this quo warranto extraordinary writ with the Ohio Supreme Court, right?
In essence, I didn't know what to call it.
Right.
Okay, but I asked him, and he did, and we just sat back and waited. And my feeling was this: if the Supreme Court came back and said he's qualified, I live with that, because it was someone of authority saying he was. I couldn't get anybody in authority to tell me he was or wasn't. At
the Stark County Democratic Party Central Committee level.
Right. So, and then if they come back and said he wasn't, fine, and we'd proceed from there. I wasn't batting either way. I just had to go on my gut feeling and what 7 different attorneys, and especially the prosecutor's office, was
One thing I've been itching to ask you, because of your long and close relationship with the Ohio Buckeye Sheriff Association, were you surprised that
I was shocked
that they intervened on behalf of candidate
yes.
Maier? Okay. I called Bob Cornwell, who's the director of the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association, in the beginning when this all came to be, and I told him that George Maier now had an interest in it, and we talked a little bit, and I got Bob's opinion, and he felt that his time at the Department of Public Safety couldn't be counted towards law enforcement because it was a civilian position. That was Bob's thinking, and I never called them back again. I didn't feel as though you should drag the Buckeye State Sheriff's Association into a political battle. But the Maier side apparently felt differently.
Somehow they got an amicus brief from them. I don't know how. It was done by, I think it's Barry, who's their attorney down there. Now, since this has all happened, Bob has called me, and I questioned him on that, and I told him I would. The reason I didn't call him was I didn't think I should drag those people into something like that. It's nothing. As president of that association in 2008, we'd have never gotten involved in anything like that on a local basis. So I told him that I would speak to him later down the road, across dinner, or come down and visit him, and I'd like to talk to him about it and see why they did what they did, because I felt that they were saying that they felt that George did qualify, and I said apparently it didn't mean anything because the Supreme Court ruled otherwise. So now it's, I get frustrated, and I thought the Supreme Court ruling was pretty.
And when did you first learn of that? What was the first moment that?
I was in Florida. I was at sitting with my hostess at the campgrounds that we're at, and we were just talking, and we were perhaps looking for another spot to move to, and we were just
early in the morning, right?
Yeah, it was probably around 9 o'clock.
Okay.
And I got a phone call from Lou Darrow, who told me that, did you hear the ruling came down? And I said, no, I hadn't heard a word. He said, well, Beck should be calling you, Greg Beck should be calling you, but he just called me, and they ruled that he was not qualified. So, and I wasn't jubilant. I didn't celebrate. I felt a little bad. I mean, I hoped that he did qualify. I wasn't trying to come out and nail this guy. I just wanted this office to be.
You just wanted clarification. Was that the primary reason you went ahead with the quo wardo?
Yes.
Is that you didn't feel like the Stark County Democratic Party Central Committee, under the chairmanship of Chairman Gonzalez, got that job done? I
didn't think that anybody had vetted them.
Right.
No one could say definitely that he did. I was hearing from Randy that he felt he did, and the two attorneys that he talked to did, but I had 7 attorneys over here saying they didn't, 4 of which were prosecutors, the prosecutor and his assistants, and I've got to, I'm sorry, I got to listen to my legal advice as a sheriff, and I gave them more weight, and I wasn't satisfied with the answers. And I told them I wasn't satisfied. I said, all I want is someone in authority to say yes or no. That's all I want. If they say yes, I go about my way. Nothing, no problem. If they say no, then we got another issue. Whatever the case may be, I can live with. And my attorneys knew that. I said, if they come back and say yes, we're not going any further on this. He said, well, we don't think we can. I said, okay, I just want you to know I can live with whatever they say. I just want somebody in authority to say it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I take it now that the Supreme Court has told the Stark County Democratic Party Central Committee to go back to the process, that you don't trust that the party's going to proceed in accordance with the order of the Supreme Court of 11-6. Is that correct?
Well, because I thought they would have acted already. I don't think the court said you get another 45 days.
Right.
The court said what you did was wrong. Nullify all of that doings. George Maier was never sheriff.
Right.
And you should go back to the 2 eligible candidates and choose from those 2 candidates, or give it to the guy who got the next highest vote. Something to that.
So you're still standing on the premise that February 7th, 2013, the qualification date that the Supreme Court referred to in its ruling is a fixed date.
That's right. It doesn't move.
Right.
It's still the same vacancy. We're trying to fill Mike McDonald's vacancy. And those were the parameters set by it. I didn't set them. The law sets them. And February 7th was the last date you could become qualified. The vote was on February 5th. Anything that happens after February 7th or any candidate doesn't count because the time's up. Only those who qualified before that date, Larry Dordia and Lou Darrow, are eligible for that position.
So as far as you're concerned, it's been reported, and I think now confirmed because I've seen a letter from George Maier himself, that he's working in Harrison County as a full-time deputy. Now, that doesn't count toward the party process. Now, it could solve his problem, and will undoubtedly solve his problem if he decides to run in the Democratic primary in May of 2014.
Exactly. I agree with you 100%. It doesn't solve his problem now. He can't go backwards in what he's done. He's out of the game. But if he would want to run perhaps in May of, like you said, in 2014 in the primary, that I think possibly it would qualify him as a full-time law enforcement, which he's lacking by working down there for Joe Myers.
But by your thinking, your man that you're backing should be sheriff up at that point in time, and so you're likely, I'm sure, to be backing Lou Darrow to a Democratic primary.
Yes.
Okay.
And I don't want to create enemies over this. I don't want to, it's somewhat politics, but I never looked at it as a political thing on my side. I looked at it just wanting the most qualified candidate in the office. It could have been any Democrat. If there was other people there, it didn't have to be Lou Darrow. As long as they were qualified and met the, I didn't particularly want a Republican to fill it, but or Larry Doherty to fill it.
But he's qualified.
They let him on the ballot. He was there that night. You saw him.
Right.
So I thought they were very open in regards to that part.
Now, is the writ being filed today? If I understood your remarks to Ponder yesterday, you expected the writ of prohibition to keep the party from proceeding contra to the Ohio Supreme Court order of November 6th, correct?
Well, you know more than what it's called than me. All I know is we're filing something today. Greg Beck is filing something today to ensure that the party does what it's instructed to do by the Supreme Court.
So as we speak, you haven't had any confirmation from your attorney that it in fact got filed?
Not as yet, I haven't, no.
Okay. Now, when I talked to Commissioner Burnaby today, he said that he spoke to both you and Chairman Gonzalez, and I think separately, this past week.
Yesterday I spoke to him.
Okay, and what was that conversation?
I just want to let him know what was going on. First of all, I wasn't collecting any back pay. That I didn't work, and I don't believe I should get it. I don't think George should get it either, because he was unlawfully in the seat.
So you think the taxpayers should recover that money?
I think Mr. Connolly's right on the money. Mm-hmm. I question the amount of money he put by putting his name on things around here, over $13,000. Couldn't you wait until the Supreme Court ruled in one way or the other before you plastered your name on everything?
Right.
I did spend any money taking his name off because the Supreme Court said he never was sheriff. Like you pointed out on your blog, I believe his name is erased from that portion I missed now.
Okay, so you did, that was an oversight?
Yes, I didn't even know it existed. Okay. But anyways, I'm not putting my name on anything. If you see my name on something, that's because when we peeled his banner off, my banner's under it. And if you peel my banner off, Bruce Umpleby's banner's under it. So it's to save money and not buy the whole star, we just buy the banner.
Right. Just on the point of you're not getting any pay, and when I talked to Commissioner Burnaby today, he thinks that, and it's my term, not his, that's kind of a grandstanding, and that of course you shouldn't get paid. So I take it you don't of course agree with my term, but you agree with his analysis that you should not get paid?
Yeah, well, I should not.
Okay.
And I won't argue that. I wasn't doing the job, and I don't believe in taking money from you if I don't do the job, and I don't want paid. And I have another issue was he had a fundraiser. Means that he was never a candidate for sheriff, really a qualified candidate. Are you allowed to open up a fundraising account to run for the office of sheriff, or you're not eligible to be the sheriff?
I see.
And all that money that he I don't know how much he did. I never went down and looked at the Board of Elections. And I'm not trying to be vindictive. My question is, I feel these are the things I'd have been questioned on if I did it. What are you going to do with that money? Do you have to pay that money back? Can you donate it to charity? But you surely, with not being qualified, you can't be sitting there because you aren't qualified to be a candidate for the office of sheriff.
Now, there's another issue sitting out there that you did an interview with another journalist, and you were saying that you were going to ask the prosecutor to look into whether or not George Maier should be prosecuted criminally.
Yes.
Where does that stand?
I went down to see Mr. Ferraro yesterday, and he was out. And I didn't tell him I was coming. I was down seeing Mr. Burnaby and the rest of the commissioners, and I stopped over to see Mr. Ferraro, and he wasn't in. So I'm going to go back down. I'm not looking to be vindictive there either. But if it was a law broken, then I want to deal with it. If
so you still on that?
Yeah. See those books open over there in the counter? That's open to the election laws, and
okay.
I'm just researching a little bit on my own. I'm not on a headhunting expedition. If there's nothing there, it will die a quiet death. If there is, I'll bring it up, and it'll be up to I'm sure he can't prosecute because of a conflict of interest, but perhaps something, if there is a violation. If there's none, I've got no problem with that.
Now, I've heard you say during our talk today that you have no problem, no bone to pick really with George Maier except for the qualification issues, and that you think that he did a good job while he was here. But there will be people out there saying, well, I hear what you say, Sheriff Tim Swanson, but what you're doing is just causing a lot of misery for Mr. Maier, and along with it, a lot of uncertainty and instability for Stark County. How would you respond to that kind of?
I'm doing what's right, and I've always done what's right, in spite of everything else. I don't ignore wrongdoing. And am I really causing this, or is he causing this? So,
well, yeah. Who do you? I want to explore that just a little bit with you. Bottom line, who do you blame for where Stark County is right now? You know, a few years ago, Stark County went through a lot of trauma in the situation in the Treasurer's office where Mr. Frostacci stole almost $3 million, and all the controversy about that. And
well, I don't know if I have to point the blame. I guess the law needs to be clear in regards to who determines your qualification. You know, there's not many offices that call for qualifications.
Right.
Okay? If you remember a little over 10 years ago, you didn't even have to be a doctor to be a coroner in the state of Ohio. So there's got to be a mechanism built into the law that if you are a candidate and there's qualifications that you must meet, then there has to be someone who ensures that you make that, or a body that makes sure that you meet that, other than the Democratic body or the Republican
the political party body.
Right.
It should be somebody who understands policing.
And that in the law.
Right?
Right.
Right. And so, again, name, I know you're a person that's direct and it doesn't hesitate to call the situation as you see it. The name of the person or persons that you think has put Stark County through all this.
Well, at this point, I'd have to say I think Randy could have done a better job of vetting the credentials for both people. He feels that he did as best a job as he could, and I think he could have done a better job. And I surely wouldn't have ignored 4 prosecutors who stood up during that meeting. You saw them, you heard them yourself, and voiced their opinion. And I think that you know, if George is doing this with good faith, but then he ought to step that back now and say, you know what, I'll get myself qualified and I'll be in that primary in 2014.
And that's been my position. You know, we should welcome qualified candidates to run for office. And I know party people don't think this way, but I like to see contests within parties. So you would fully support George Maier going through the electoral process through the Democratic Party, and then if he wins that, and
so be it.
Wait, could I see Tim Swanson supporting George Maier if he survives a Democratic primary?
Well, it depends if someone else is running against him that I support more, but yeah.
Yeah, well, let's assume that it's Mr. Dordia.
And I would support George.
Okay, so anything else that you want to get across to the Stark County
Well, I hope we put this behind us as quick as possible, George. The people here don't need it. The people, our community, don't need it. And it's never been about personalities. It's never been about people. It's always been about qualifications. And do you have the qualifications as outlined in Ohio Revised Code to sit in this seat? This is the highest seat of authority in law enforcement in Stark County. I think you ought to be above all qualified to sit here, and that's all I want, and that's all I'm asking for. Just do the right thing, and I'll be back in Florida in the sunshine.
Well, thank you very much for being with the Stark County Political Report. Share your views on this still unfolding situation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for reporting the facts.